Welcome to Manager Tools. Today's cast, the Big Four of Performance Communications, Part 3. Questions this cast answers are, how can I ease into giving feedback? What topics should I be giving feedback on? And what kinds of performance conversations should I be having? If you want the answers to these questions and more, keep listening.
Lately, we've been doing a lot of customized training for teams, groups at organizations that are focused on adjusting their management learning and learning beyond the management, communicator, and hiring trainings that we do. If you have a team and you'd like to get them some customized training, we'd love to hear from you. We're happy to come out if we can provide that service. You can talk to Maggie at manager-tools.com, and she'll be able to let you know what we could come out and train your team on, custom or not, and when we could do so. And we're happy to help.
Another area to look for those feedback, those pieces of possible potential performance communication or conversations is around deadlines and communication. Think of the myriad of things that your organization does on time. Delivers earnings reports to Wall Street, for example. Kind of a big deal, I would suggest. Kind of a big deal. Imagine being late with something so complicated and where communications are so subtle, yet so important. Another one, paychecks. Paychecks are on time, aren't they? Do you know how difficult it is to get that right?
Yeah, but what would it say if they couldn't get it right?
Right?
So we expect the people in finance to meet their deadlines.
Yeah.
And if not, everybody starts screaming.
Up in arms.
But then we're not going to meet our deadlines or people out. That's not true. We meet our deadlines. There are people out there who aren't going to meet their deadlines and expect of others that certain deadlines are non-negotiable, like paychecks or airline flights. 99% of people are on time for airline flights, although I am shocked. That's too big of, let's not even go down that rabbit hole. So 99% of people are on time for airline flights. 99% of colleagues are on time and ready to present to customers and clients when they're supposed to and have the opportunity to do so. And I would even suggest too, there's a little bit of frustration for me about people being on time for things that are external, like, presentations to a client or a customer. Okay. And you're not on time or as crisp with your colleagues internally. It communicates to me, this internal person isn't as important to me or, to the person presenting as the customer or client. And I'm willing to provide grace in areas because I know my team, and there are times where we let something, something has to give. However, I have similar feelings about if you dress up for the grocery store, but you won't dress up for our Zoom call. And I'm not even asking dress up, guys. You could probably wear the same thing that you wear to the grocery store. In any case, the idea that you would look better at the grocery store than you would on a Zoom call with internal team members is a bit frustrating.
Yeah.
So we ask the organization to deliver products and services on time.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we so tolerant of missed deadlines on our own teams? How do those two things?
Yeah, they don't
match.
They don't match at all. It's just, this is another opportunity for conversations, positive and negative, on a regular basis. And I mean, let's face it, timeliness or lack thereof is constantly happening around us. It's not like you have to look for an opportunity. Everything you do is an opportunity for communication, positive or negative, about timeliness. And folks, the vast majority of it is going to be positive. It kind of gets me sometimes, Kate, when we talk to managers about feedback, and immediately everyone thinks negative. Immediately, the moment you say feedback, everyone's like, oh, yay, now I can finally ding them for all those things they've done wrong. And at the same time, they say, well, I can't even think of examples of things to give positive feedback about. Okay, but people are coming to meetings and owe you deliverables, and they're doing things all of the time that are in some way time bound. And we'd suggest the vast majority of those things are being done on time.
Yeah.
For every person, every direct for every person has got tons of examples.
If 90% of your team members showed up on time to the meeting, that's 90% of the team did it right. And we could say to them, hey, thanks for being on time. Hey, thanks for being here when it's time to start. It's because those negatives stand out to people. I've gone back and forth historically in my mind about, is it a problem with the word feedback and people just thinking of it connotatively as negative, or is it a problem with our lack of awareness or our lack of appreciation for all the things that go right on a daily basis? It always reminds me, I used to have this really old Ford Bronco truck and I loved it desperately. I loved it so much. And sometimes you would go out in the morning and it wouldn't start.
Yeah.
Maybe it was cold or like too hot, whatever. It was finicky. If you have a car that starts every morning, you don't really think about the reliability involved there.
Such a good analogy.
So then when, and my love for the Bronco was such that I was willing to suffer its cruelty to me. And I think we do this to our team members. I think we notice only the outliers, which, to be clear, is something that humans are particularly evolutionarily bound to.
Designed to do.
Yeah, exactly. However, if your car starts every day, if 90% of your team is on time to this meeting, that's an opportunity for positive. And it might even be that you mention it, to the group, which we wouldn't suggest you do with feedback. And you just start these conversations. When everybody's sitting down and it's time to start, you say, it's time to start. Thank you guys for being here on time. Something like that. So that they start to hear and then therefore think about, now, because you've heard this podcast, it's like looking for a car, right? You'll see an old Bronco everywhere, although they're really popular right now. So that makes sense. The purpose, though, of these increased communications is heightened awareness.
You're absolutely right.
Hopefully, then they'll start to do it.
Right. And they'll start to do it. Again, to Kate's point, folks, this doesn't have to be feedback. You can just talk to your directs about timeliness in meeting their deadlines. You can just say to kick off the meeting, thank you guys so much for being here. And you've thanked the people who are there on time. The people that are late didn't get that same thank you. I mean, it's just saying more words, which will lead to a more fertile environment for feedback when you're ready, right? Even if you never get to the 4-part manager tools feedback model, because you're saying it more often, you're keeping it top of mind. You're ensuring that these kinds of communications are infused in conversation. Your team will improve its timeliness and delivering work simply by making it part of the communications that you have all of the time. It's just a more readily discussed topic. People will think of it more often because it's a topic of conversation more often. And again, of course, it's not necessary that every deadline that ever existed be met. If we take necessary at its true meaning, but that's fine. We're smart managers. We know human beings aren't perfect, but there's an easy answer for missed deadlines. Communication in advance of a miss.
Just letting somebody know.
It's just letting somebody know. I talk to folks at this when we talk at our EMCs. When we ask managers to give pieces of negative feedback, again, we're not talking feedback here, but we give negative feedback about timeliness. Oftentimes managers say, but what if there's a good reason? There's a good reason. There absolutely is a good reason.
But if there's a good reason, why wouldn't you say, hey, here's why this thing is going to be late?
Right, exactly. There's a great reason. The issue here isn't necessarily that they were late. It's that they were late and didn't tell anybody. The only reason we're talking about lateness now is because they didn't tell anybody before they were late. I mean, there are more than one options. We feel like lateness is binary. It's actually not. It's not being on time or being late. It's being on time, telling someone you'll be late, or being late. So we want to stress those comms in advance of a miss with our team. So we could say something like, for example, to our directs, listen, you can be late, but you can't be silent too.
And then this will normalize this behavior when you transition from assigning tasks to assigning deliverables. If they know in advance, hey, my expectation is not just that we're on time, but if we're not on time, that we'll all know about it, then we can stop assigning tasks and switch to deliverables.
Yeah.
Because the expectation has been verbalized in conversation and therefore can be applied with deliverables. Because the deliverable, y'all, if you haven't heard this from us before, is both the assignment of a task and the reporting of the task's completion with the task.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, send me, which would be the reporting function, the budgets, completed budgets, by 5 p.m. Central, Wednesday, and then the date, which I don't know a Wednesday that's coming up. So I'm going to just
February 1st.
assume it. February 1st. Ooh, that's nice. Oh, it's the last day of January. Didn't even know. If you find yourself tracking down whether something is done after a deadline, that's a good sign that you assigned it as a task and not a deliverable.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Such a good point.
I used to work in a place where a lot of the team members they spent their day either in a lab or in a classified environment, which meant you cannot track them down.
Yeah.
You don't have access.
How are you going to find them?
You genuinely, they're not in their office. Don't go looking for them. You're not allowed to go to the thing that they're doing or where the place where they are. And that is the time at which I became most in love with deliverables.
Totally.
Because then I don't have it in my inbox, right? Because I always say, send me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have it in my inbox. Well, okay, it's 12 o'clock. It's not in my inbox. I can just send an email.
Yeah.
And that means I don't have to go looking for them because I won't find them. Also, you don't want to have to put on an ESD jacket just to go ask somebody if they turned in their report.
Right. So yeah, all this to say, folks, if you want a team to meet its deliverables, start talking about deliverables as part of your performance conversations. And again, it doesn't take feedback. It doesn't take the feedback model. It can start with discussions about performance and timeliness generally overall. The more you talk about it, the more it'll raise to the level of your team's importance. If you're struggling to have an effective relationship with your coworkers, that's not an altogether unusual issue. We don't really realize it, but the different individuals in our workplaces, in the world generally, have much different communication styles from one another. We don't naturally communicate great with all of the people all of the time, and luckily, there's a tool for that. If you're interested in having better communication and relationships with the folks with you work, look online, manager-tools.com/products for our Effective Relationship series, the perfect add-on to the empty disk so that you can have better relationships with your colleagues. All right. It takes us to communication.
Yeah, which is interesting because we've been talking so much about communication this entire time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And communication as a function of ensuring these other things get done, right? The first two components of performance, work quality and timeliness, most people get.
Mm-hmm.
They understand the nature of the work and the importance of promptness and timely completion. Some industries and specialties, this happens more often, more technical. That's the worst places. But many professionals don't understand that work in an organization imposes a requirement for a robust communication, simply by function that there are more people involved.
Right, dude. How many times have we heard this one? I mean, I'm pretty sure we might have a podcast about this. Many professionals say, do you want me to do the work or do you want me to report on the work? But
oh my gosh.
I mean, how many times have we talked about this? Folks, this is a false argument. We work in multi-person organizations.
Other people consume the work that you do.
Right.
You have an output. And you know this to be true because you fight to get the outputs you need from your colleagues from them. You don't know, is that thing done? Has it been completed? you know you need it. You
Mhm.
know you need it from Jim. Okay, where is it?
Right.
If you struggle to receive the work that you need done in order to do your own from your colleagues, you are on the receiving end of this. And
You
I
are.
find so often it's frustrating to discover that people who are on the receiving end of this attempt to validate their position when their
Mhm.
position is that they are also inflicting it on their coworkers. I don't understand how it could be true that we would like for people to tell us the things that we need to know and then immediately turn around and not tell other
Exactly.
people. Oh my goodness gracious. You and I know about this. We've been talking all week about some stuff we're working on together. And even the idea of us sending a message to the other person of, hey, I'm going to go into that folder or file. Is that okay? Are you in it? Are you using this thing? You know, you think to yourself, oh, should I tell the person like I'm going to go work on that thing? Of course you should. What if they're in it? What if that means they get to go do something else for the rest of the afternoon? Even in process work demands communication, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we've said this before, Kate. I know I've said this before. If you do the work, but don't communicate the work is done, it's exactly the same as having never done that work at all. If the next
nobody
person
knows.
if the next person in line can't take what you've done and do their part of the project with it, then you may as well have never done it at all. I mean,
Yeah.
don't do the work if you're not going to talk about the fact that you've done the work. I mean, I think we talked about this in things recently, and things we think we think. Those of you who are licensees receive things we think we think. And we did, I want to say earlier this year, a big piece about communication and the number of comms required, especially for virtual teams, in order for the next person down the line to take advantage of or utilize the work product created by the people upstream. And again, not communicating you've done something such that the people who are next in line can't use the thing you've done is akin to never having done it at all.
It totally is. We had an example of this recently. Somebody was asked to schedule something. The place where we were tracking the fact that that was done or not didn't include or had a few tasks, which is why we don't recommend you have and in your tasks, because then it's marked done. You can't tell which one was marked done if both are marked done. It caused an absolute panic.
Absolutely.
Did this get done? So effectively, the security of having it done was erased by the 30 minutes of panic
Absolutely.
that 4 or 5 people went through.
Mhm.
It would be better to begin now talking about
Yes.
before feedback, the methods and quality of your direct communication, the frequency of their communication. Is it enough? Of course not. The tone of their communication. Does it match context and content of the message? Can they deliver communications that are about disagreements in an agreeable way? Can they give people the information that is needed? And to some extent, if you're listening to this and you're one of the people who's not communicating externally, make a note that it might be worth considering how much communication you would want
Yes.
in terms of what, the level that would be of value to other people.
Totally. And folks, untangle from your brains right now the idea that these types of active communication with one's colleagues are in any way a representation of one's personality. Performance communications, the tone, the speed at which we deliver those communications, whether or not we can deal with disagreements in an agreeable way, is not about one's personality. Every single one of your directs has the ability to communicate differently than they do with their coworkers, with their spouse, with their children, with the people at the grocery store counter, the checkout counter, the therapist, their neighbors. People are constantly communicating to different people in different ways based on what the situation and what the audience calls for. So
if somebody says that, right?
The idea that they could not be able to change their communications with a colleague because that's their personality is just patently false. It's wrong. That is absolutely untrue. We know that. We see you.
I would also suggest that if that's your defense, you're a jerk.
Okay, yeah. Reasonable.
If a direct claims the personality defense, I would suggest educating them. Don't call them a jerk. I'll call them a jerk here.
That
They're
might
being a
make it
jerk.
worse temporarily.
Instead, perhaps as a manager, it would be better educate them with performance communications. Explain that their personality, to use their own word, is not what they were hired for or what they're paid for.
That sounds like something I'd say.
Or what the organization expects. Of course, we have to tell them what we expect, even without giving feedback. Be clear about your expectations. Express to them that you expect of them candor, kindness, and timeliness in their communications. In many cases, sure, you'll have to say, frequent, effective communication is part of your job. And okay, you should probably check your job descriptions to make sure it's delineated there because it's often forgotten. Job descriptions are, in my experience, notoriously bad at actually stating what needs to be done. Because a team that doesn't communicate robustly is not a team. That's a group of individuals who are co-located to each other. And team members choose not to communicate are asserting a desire to not be part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
Are we even going to allow that? I'm not. Frankly, I'm not. You could go work somewhere else. I always think of you could work in your mom's basement writing code.
Right.
That's the only place I can think of. And then, of course, the dream there is always the code will get so big and wonderful that other people will want to work with you. Oh, there you go again, having to work on a team. So, okay.
Yes. So, yes, these communications also include reporting and presenting. There are so few roles that don't require at least occasional reporting or communication. A team member.
Basements.
Yeah, exactly. Basements, garages.
And even then your
trees
mom
and
will want to talk
dogs.
to you.
Exactly. A team member who's a poor presenter can be talked to about their weakness and encouraged to improve. Coaching a poor presenter can be as easy as having them join a local Toastmasters organization.
Oof,
You don't even have to
so
be,
good.
oh my gosh, right? You don't even have to be the one having many of these performance conversations with them about presenting. All you need to do is say, hey, why don't you check out Toastmasters as a way of improving presenting? And then that group will performance communicate to that person on your behalf.
That
Done.
would be awesome.
Oh my gosh, right?
It's like finding someone, a coach or a
Yeah,
trainer.
basically.
It's getting them a resource,
Mhm.
which you can't be the person who is the resource always. But
Mhm.
okay, you guys have probably heard our coaching model. And if you haven't, that's where we discuss the distinction there, which is a big one because frankly, it's necessary. You can't be everything to everyone, which brings us, interestingly enough, segue to relationships. If you work in a place with humans, you're going to have, you do, relationships. Every professional is expected, required to maintain effective relationships with those with whom they work, which in many cases goes beyond reliability of work performance. It may mean talking to your team members about their relationships with others, guiding them towards more frequent communications within those relationships, helping to create more positivity in those relationships, because your team members are required to maintain good relationships with each other. They're expected by a manager with any kind of reasonable thought around what's necessary, that they will develop relationships with other parts of the organization that your team interacts with, right? They can't, only internal relationships being positive won't help us when we have to work with those other parts of the organization that our team touches upon. And those directs who refuse to do so, again, they might use their personality defense. Talk to them about your expectations, about the standards. Be open with them about, hey, this is the expectation. Every one of your team members ought to be expected to be known and respected by others in other parts of the organization and known as to be someone who's respected and, positively interacts with others within the team.
Yes, Kate, absolutely. It's not enough in most relationships just to communicate more often. You must also be polite to be effective. And a simple way to test for this, again, without feedback, is to ask your direct in future one-on-ones with them. Who outside of our team could you call and ask for a favor and be reasonably sure they would grant it? And it's
Ooh, that's a good one.
such an easy, simple measure. And the reason it works is because favors are granted to those with whom we have good relationships.
Mm-hmm.
People do not do favors for individuals because of their role, because of who they are in the organization, for people that they do not know. People do favors for those with whom they have good relationships. And we've frequently said expertise power is not just knowing more than someone else. Expertise power means knowing more than others and having others respect your knowledge, also with a good enough relationship that they would be willing to ask you for help. You're not an expert just because you think you're an expert. You're an expert because other people agree that you're an expert. There are plenty of self-appointed experts that have no expertise power.
That's it. That's the distinction. You have to have a lot of knowledge, and then people have to think you have a lot of knowledge. And then those two things aren't even expertise power. That would be being an expert. Whereas expertise power only comes in if people like you enough to be willing to talk to you about your expertise. There's probably a lot of people in technical fields who are listening to this and thinking, oh yeah, I know that guy.
Yeah.
The guy who's just doesn't have any expertise power, even though everybody knows he has 6 PhDs, because no one is willing to go down there and talk to that person. Interestingly enough, one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to my directs about, and this may simply be a function of what I would call like kind of institutional memory of relationships here, because you and I have been here for long enough that we have developed ways in which we communicate internally that are based on the person we're talking to, that we know will be effective, convincing, that the other person will find polite and useful. So I spend a lot of time talking to my directs, and y'all may, listeners, you may be interested in talking to your directs about what they present to peers and increasing positive communications and relationships with their peers or others in the organization, saying, you know, this person likes to hear the content this way, or they need an advance notice, or they prefer email. It's these choices sometimes about how people want to be communicated to and how then to be viewed as polite. Because some of us, the way we view politeness is different than others. And these positive relationships, you could even start talking to people about, hey, you know, so-and-so really prefers an email, or so-and-so prefers a meeting. And it's these considerations then. There's all kinds of things that you can bring to mind for your team simply by focusing on them. You think of it kind of, or I think of it a bit as if to say, I am going to focus my energies here, and that increase energy into that particular part of the system, which is simply, these are the things that the manager is paying attention to. The manager inputs energy into that system by communicating in front of the team, to the team, with the team about, these are my expectations. These are the things I'm looking at, I'm thinking about. And as the manager, they're watching you. You're setting an example.
Absolutely.
And if your example includes being on time, dressing nicely, being polite, delivering on time, setting deliverables within your team, measuring, tracking, then that example will follow through. And then when feedback comes, and I say this because most of you are thinking about negative, when feedback comes, they won't be surprised. They'll know. In fact, they already know where they're doing well and where they're falling short. We're just not talking to them about it. And it's absolutely, as we said at the very beginning, it's absolutely unacceptable as managers that we're not talking about it, because we're all thinking about it. We're all feeling about it, I would even suggest. If you're having one of those weeks where you're chapped about something that happened, you're thinking about it, you're feeling about it, not communicating about it is the reason it's not changing. And you can initiate the beginnings of this, a performance culture within your team by simply talking about it, inputting energy into that part of the system.
Exactly. The big four of performance factors are quality of work, timeliness, communication, and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about these areas regularly. Bring them up in your staff meeting. Recur to them in your one-on-ones. Ask for more and better adherence to these critical factors more often with your team members. And all of these performance communications can happen before you ever think about giving feedback. To Kate's point, if you create a performance culture around these factors on your team, when you do introduce feedback, you'll have to look far harder for things to give your negative feedback on, because people will already be doing the things you want them to be doing because you've influenced the culture in that way. And when you are ready for feedback, your team will be ready to hear it.
Which is so exciting.
So exciting.
Yay. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Kate. That's all for this week, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. Join us again next week for a new topic.